Hello everyone! Sethos, our most newly introduced Sumeru character, is one of the 3 new characters coming out in patch 4.7. Even though he is the 4-star of the patch, his kit actually has a lot of nuance and choices you can make on how to play him, and he potentially has a gameplay style that we haven't seen from the current bow characters we have. So let's get right into his initial kit and see what he's all about. As always, remember this is very early information, so very subject to change. Sethos is a 4-star Electro Bow user intended to be an on-field main DPS. He has an Elemental Mastery Ascension and his kit revolves around charged attack damage. However, he doesn't necessarily have to perform charged attacks to dish out damage. Starting with his normal talent, the multipliers at talent level 10 are shown here. His normal attack multipliers will only be used alongside his burst, which we'll get to later. Plunge attacks you can ignore, and lastly his charged shots. The only relevant thing here is his shadow piercing shot, which has both attack and EM scaling and can pierce through enemies. Because of this, the only aim shot you should be performing is this one. However, shadow piercing shot normally takes 6 seconds to fully charge, and when fully charged, Sethos cannot move. Luckily, Sethos's A1 and A4 passives massively buff his shadow piercing shots. His A1 has a lot of numbers that can make it complicated, but practically speaking, all you need to know is that it allows Sethos to use 20 energy to reduce the charge time of shadow piercing shot from 6 seconds to 0.3 seconds, allowing for an extremely quick and shotgun style charged attack gameplay, similar to how Tighnari plays with his charged attacks. In addition, Sethos's A4 gives him a buff every 15 seconds called Scorching Sandshade that buffs a maximum of 4 of his shadow piercing shots, increasing their EM multiplier by 600%. And since we've covered his A1 and A4 passive already, Sethos' special passive displays Sumeru specialty resources on your map. Ultimately, Sethos' A1 and A4 passives push for a charged attack playstyle where Sethos quickly aims and fires 4 shadow piercing shots in quick succession, consuming 80 energy but also having a huge EM multiplier. However, shadow piercing shots are not the only way Sethos can deal damage, because his burst allows for a different type of playstyle. With a 60 energy cost and a 15-second cooldown, Sethos' burst turns his normal attacks into dusk bolts for 8 seconds. These dusk bolts deal electro damage, pierce through enemies, have an added EM multiplier, and are considered charged attack damage. If you go back to the normal talent, Sethos' burst just adds that EM multiplier to each hit of his normal attack string. Effectively, his burst makes him play like HOYO-MiX, enhancing and infusing his normal attacks until the buff is over. So while Sethos' passives give him a quick fire charged attack gameplay, his burst gives him normal attack spam gameplay. With a burst and charge shots that consume energy, Sethos' kit is energy reliant. Fortunately, his skill helps alleviate this. After using his skill, Sethos deals electro damage in front of him and moves backwards. If this triggers an electro-related reaction, Sethos recovers an additional 12 energy on top of the particles created from using your skill. The skill doesn't have any EM scaling and always recovers 12 extra energy regardless of level, so you can technically leave this talent alone at level 1 and it will still serve its purpose of generating energy for Sethos. Now because Sethos is a 4-star, Constellations can be very kit defining, so let's go over them first. C1 gives 15% crit rate for his shadow piercing shots, so his charged attacks, very simple. For C2, he can gain up to a maximum of 30% electro damage bonus for 10 seconds. All you need to do is do 2 of the following: regain energy from your skill, use your burst, or consume energy to fire a shadow piercing shot. C3 increases his normal talent 3 levels. C4 is whenever his shadow piercing shot, his charged attack, or his dusk bolts, which is his enhanced normals when he uses his burst, hits 2 or more enemies, the team gains 80 EM for 10 seconds. C5 increases his burst by 3 levels, and C6 gives Sethos 1 fast shadow piercing shot that doesn't consume any energy every 15 seconds. So basically, with C6 you get 1 free charged attack every rotation. Similar to other 4-star DPSs, Constellations do affect his damage a lot. Personally, I don't think it's too egregious, especially when compared to Constellations like C6 Farazan. However, do keep in mind that some of his Constellations such as C1, C2, and C6 do give him a decent damage gain. So those are all the details of Sethos' initial kit, but the big question is, how do you play him? He has fast charged attack gameplay with his shadow piercing shots, but also normal attack spamming gameplay if you utilize his burst. And you can't really do both entirely because his passives incentivize 4 quick aim shots for that additional 600% EM multiplier, which costs 80 energy at C0. If you add an additional 60 energy from using his burst, you get a 140 energy requirement, which is pretty unrealistic even with his energy generation from his skill. So there's a lot of discussion on which playstyle is better, and a good amount of people, including theorycrafters like Zajef, who talked about Sethos a little bit in his initial impressions video, that consider his charged attack playstyle overall better. Now, although I don't consider myself a theorycrafter, I think I somewhat disagree with this perspective because in my opinion the answer is much more nuanced. I did some digging into the one Sethos sheet I was able to look at and did some of my own quick and rudimentary math to try and answer this question myself. So the summary of my math and assumptions are shown here. Pause if you want to take a closer look. Remember that the following conclusions are just based on the initial kit. If big changes arrive, they'll likely change my interpretations. Ultimately, 4 buffed and fast charged attacks have a total of 1008% attack, and 3,368% EM multiplier, while the burst enhanced normal attacks give a total of 1,253.3% attack plus 4,605% EM multiplier. And clearly, the burst rotation has higher multipliers across the board. This does not mean that the burst is strictly better, however, because this isn't a calculation comparing team damage. This is just to numerically visualize the two different sources of Sethos' damage. There are many factors that can affect the strength of each playstyle. For instance, each of Sethos' 4 shadow-piercing shots aggravate at a higher EM multiplier than his normal attacks. In addition, the charged attacks take significantly less field time, making the damage very front-loaded and quick, which may be favorable in some situations. This also means, however, that Sethos attacks for 5 seconds and does pretty much nothing for the rest of the rotation, so you need to fill out the remaining rotation time with other teammates to upkeep team DPS. This isn't a big issue for the burst-oriented playstyle because a longer field time allows for the much simpler gameplay of support setup into main DPS, on-fielding into repeat the cycle. However, similar to Yoimiya gameplay, this playstyle loses damage if you miss enhanced normal attacks within your burst duration, either from auto-targeting, missing the enemy, or you getting interrupted by enemy attacks. In summary, I think that both playstyles are viable for Sethos. To me, the answer isn't entirely black and white, and it really depends on which teammates you pair with him and different combat scenarios. Now, if you notice, the energy cost of each playstyle for shadow piercing shots is 80 energy, while the burst is 60. And we can just leave this as one playstyle taking less energy over the other, but I think 80 energy isn't that high of a requirement, so we can fit in a 20 energy empowered charged attack into the burst rotation to even out the energy cost, resulting in a charged attack and normal attack hybrid rotation that could potentially bring out the most out of Sethos' damage. The rotation I'm thinking of is this. First, you set up your support skills like normal, then you use Sethos' skill. It won't give you any extra energy, but you can just funnel your particles immediately by using your burst right afterwards. Then you just normal attack spam to utilize your dusk bolts. From current animations, it looks like you can fit 3 N3s and an additional N2, but you can potentially fit more, not sure yet. After your infusion is gone, then you can use your skill again into a shadow piercing shot. With this playstyle, you do both the normal attack spam and the quick charged attack. Sethos' C2 won't be fully activated with this rotation unless you're C6. If you are C6, you can add an additional shadow piercing shot. For instance, you can do it before the first Sethos skill, so before step 2, and adding this shot will give you the full electro damage bonus given by C2 for your entire normal attack spam rotation. If you choose to ignore Sethos' burst and just focus on his charged attacks, the rotation I'm visualizing is this. Set up your support skills, then you do 1 shadow piercing shot, then you use your skill that will fully activate your C2 if you have it, then do your next 3 shadow piercing shots. Afterwards, you can choose to do even more Sethos charge attack at the cost of more energy, and keep in mind these don't have the full EM multiplier that you can possibly have, or you could refresh your support buffs, or potentially on-field damage with another character such as Yai or Tainari. Once Sethos' passive is about to be ready, which is indicated by an hourglass next to his character, then you can cycle back to step 1. Remember that C6 pretty much gives you an additional free shadow piercing shot, so you kind of fit it anywhere if you want. Lastly, if you're aiming for a burst-oriented or a hybrid gameplay like I described, you'll want to level his burst over his normals. For charged attack only and no burst gameplay, you can ignore the burst. Remember that his skill doesn't give any more energy when leveled and doesn't have EM scaling, so it's not really important to be leveled in either case. Next, let's talk about his potential weapon choices. I scanned over the 5-star bows, and honestly there are a lot of great stat sticks. You can choose any of them and it will be good. The best one is looking like Hunter's Path, which makes sense because it's the EM based one because of Tainari. For 4-star weapons, both battle pass weapons look good, especially the newer one with the extra damage percent to charged attack damage. For free to play options, if you're an older player, Windbloom Ode works. Fortunately though, there is a new free 4-star event weapon coming with this patch, and it's pretty much made for Sethos. EM substat and even more EM when the holder uses energy. So a very accessible free-to-play option just by playing this patch. As for potential artifact sets, Wanderer's Troop looks to be his general best set. No matter the playstyle, Sethos deals charge attack damage, so he takes advantage of the 4-piece, and 2-piece EM is great for an EM scaler. Another option is Gilded, gives EM and attack, which is good. If you're considering Farina teams, as always, Marchusi Hunter is an option. And lastly, 4-piece TF is something to consider to lower Sethos' skill cooldown and potentially gain a 3rd use within a rotation for extra energy. I haven't seen a theoretical rotation showing this works, so I don't have 100% confidence that this option works, but I will still bring it up as a possible option you can experiment with. Artifact stats is very simple. EM Sands, Electro Damage Goblet, Crit Circlet. Substats prioritize crit, then EM, then attack and ER are both good. As for ER recommendations, honestly I truthfully don't know. We don't know Sethos' skill particle generation, and the amount of ER heavily depends on how much energy you're willing to spend on a rotation. You can decide to spend 80 energy like in the theoretical rotations are provided, or you could do another charged attack and increase your total energy needed to 100. My gut feeling says 120% low end to 150% high end, but take this range with a massive grain of salt. Lastly, let's cover his potential teams. As an Electro main DPS that scales goes off EM just like Sino, he pretty much just has 2 team options, Aggravate or Hyperbloom, ideally with a second off-field Electro teammate with him. Pretty simple, though the characters you may want to use can depend on the playstyle you choose for Sethos. Aggravate teams are pretty much the same for both charge attack and burst oriented playstyles. The typical core of Nahida, Fischl, and Kazuha will always be the highest damage option for Aggravate teams. However, as a build character, Sethos really wants a shield so he doesn't get interrupted during his attacks, so I think using Baiju or Kirara over Nahida will be recommended for him. Now for specifically the charged attack playstyle where you can have more downtime on Sethos, you could use characters like Tainari or Yain, maybe even both in the same team if you want to experiment for fun to fill that downtime up. In these teams, after Sethos is finished unloading his charge attacks, you can on-field with your secondary carry until you're ready to cycle back to Sethos. For Hyperbloom oriented teams, you have several options. You can go a Farina based team with Baiju, you can also have your Hydra unit be the off-field healer like Kokomi or Seedween, allowing you to slot Nahida. These 2 types of teams work for any playstyle, but for a burst oriented playstyle where you actually perform normal attacks, you can have the Hydra unit be Lan or Xingqiu since you can actually proc their bursts. And that's everything I wanted to cover about Sethos' initial kit. As a 4-star DPS, the reality is that he's not going to match with most 5-star DPSs. Maybe at C6 he can get close, but I think he will eventually end up in the same spot as Gaming, a solid 4-star DPS with the right teammates. And I think even in the worst case scenario, Sethos just serves as another Hyperbloom enabler since he's an EM scaler. And honestly, that's pretty good for a new 4-star since I think we all know how strong a Hyperbloom team can be. Other than his potential strength, the most exciting thing for me is his unique bow playstyle. His charged attack focused gameplay looks viable, his enhanced normal attack spam with his burst looks viable, and a mix of both also seems very promising from the one Sethos sheet that I was able to see, and I really hope that Sethos is able to maintain having multiple playstyles being viable as the 4.7 beta progresses. Hope this initial overview and analysis on Sethos' kit was helpful to you all. Feel free to leave your thoughts and questions in the comments, like the video or sub to the channel if you like this type of content, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.